Welcome to the Honest Mamas podcast, where we talk about the emotional and spiritual aspects of the motherhood journey. We are a team of honest mamas. Myself, Melissa, Sophie, and Claire. We are psychotherapists, moms, and friends. Join us as we get real about the topics that matter to you. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 28 of the Honest Mamas podcast. This is Sophie. Today, I had the true pleasure of speaking with Taylor Ross about the topic of emotionally intelligent families. Taylor is a trauma-informed parenting consultant. I've had the privilege of participating in several trainings given by Taylor. And as a parent, I've always felt encouraged and inspired by Taylor's powerful insights. She offers deep empathy, practical tools, and knowledge of current research to help parents support their children and foster an emotionally intelligent family culture. She is an early childhood mental health graduate, has certificates in Buddhist Psychology, Meditation, and Nonviolent Parenting. She's trained in Somatic Experiencing Trauma, Mediation, and Parenting Coordination. Taylor is passionate about helping transform difficult dynamics and behaviors into rich, connected family relationships. What I love about today's conversation is how we explore basic key practices in building emotionally intelligent connections with our children. Taylor offers tips on how to stay curious when discomfort arises in relating to our children. We also discuss how being with this discomfort and curiosity teaches us about honoring basic human feelings and needs. Here's my conversation with Taylor. Hi, Taylor. Welcome to the Honest Mamas podcast.
Hi. It's nice to be here.
I'm really happy to have you here with us today. Shall we dive on in?
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, perhaps we could begin with you sharing a little bit with our listeners about how you became interested in supporting parents.
Yeah, I first started really looking intimately at the dynamics between adults and children, both educators and children and parents and children, as I was interning in Montessori preschool. I was getting my Montessori preschool credentials at the time, and I was really fascinated with the ways in which we either interfere with or help support the development of so many pieces of development, right? Mm-hmm. So empathy was a really big one. I found myself interfering. It felt like I would come in before a child even felt remorse about something they may have done, and maybe interrupted the process and walked them through how to handle tending to the other child. And the more I watched these dynamics, I was really curious about how really the subject of emotional intelligence, how emotional intelligence naturally develops and what we impose as far as behavior on children. So that was one piece that I was interested in. I had a lot of conversations with parents and educators, and it was a difficult conversation to have because there were so many people who were so deeply ingrained in the ways that they were already taught to be with children, or the ways that they had been with as a child themselves, that it felt like the question itself was threatening something.
Interesting. And
so I was led to an organization that at the time was called the Center for Nonviolent Education and Parenting. It's called the Echo Center now in Los Angeles. And really that's what that center's about. It's having this conversation about how to be with, as a parent or as an educator, children, really honoring their body, mind, and spirit in a way that takes into account trauma and the science around trauma, takes into account brain development and really looking at what's not yet developed in a child at certain stages. That is the adult's responsibility to scaffold rather than shame a child for. It was an incredibly beautiful curriculum, and I worked there for some time before moving up to the Bay Area. And then I ended up getting into UMass. Boston had an infant parent mental health program at the time. And really since then, I've just been so hungry. I was also pregnant when I started doing this work. And it was very clear to me that although there were some rich, beautiful things in my family of origin, I was not parented in a way that I would like to parent. Mm-hmm. And I really wanted to look at this. How do we parent in a way, one, that isn't modeled internally for you, but also isn't really modeled much in the external world? I knew the things that were happening that felt slightly off for me, but I didn't know what it would look like to be in relationship with my own child in a way that really landed, in a way that felt like it had a lot of integrity for me. So I've just, both in wanting to support parents in my community and also on my own journey of parenting, have continued just to collect information. The Infant Parent Mental Health Program was an unbelievably beautiful collection of lenses looking at the relationships between adults and children. And since then, I've brought in Buddhist Psychology and Meditation. I've brought in Somatic Experiencing Trauma work. I also work a lot with families who have been court-ordered to receive support or are going through some crisis in family or even crisis in identity, child or adult. And so I've, gotten some training in mediation and parenting coordination. And so that's kind of how it started, and it just keeps growing. I keep collecting information that's helpful for me as a parent. I have two daughters who are 12 and 15, and that can support the kind of diverse situations that are, the parents are coming in need for a sounding board. So, yeah.
It's a beautifully inspiring and rich path to lead you here. And I'm wondering if we can unpack a little bit of these key phrases that you said so we can share more with our listeners. You mentioned emotional, intelligent family. I wonder if you can, fill that out a little bit for us. What is it? What does it look like, feel like?
That's the question.
Yeah, that's
right.
The question.
That's the question. That's it. And I
want to know.
Yeah. I mean, actually, even just putting this in context of why I think, you have this podcast and I have I'm drawn towards the work. I am drawn to the term emotional intelligence, I believe, wasn't coined until the year 1990 in any public publication. There was, some kind of obscure academic articles years before, but nothing that was available to the public. So we weren't even putting the words emotional and intelligence next to each other. Until then. That's the year I graduated high school. And social intelligence came with that. And since then, you can't pick up a parenting book that doesn't talk about the importance of emotional intelligence. Neuroscience, social sciences, philosophy, anthropology, we're all starting to look at this concept because it's been named. And that's huge, I think, for this generation of parents, because this wasn't an explicit goal for the majority of homes when at least, if we're speaking about kind of Western culture. But I think actually we're realizing worldwide this is the case. I'm sure there are peoples who have been weaving this way of being together for a long time, and we could draw from that wisdom. But really in, kind of popular literature, this is not something we've been focusing on. We've been focusing much more on the behavior of the child rather than the emotional intelligence of the family.
Right.
And so when I'm talking about emotional intelligence, I've kind of distilled it down to this ability to be with discomfort, with compassion and care, and kind of bowing to the wisdom of it, that it's not something to be averse to. It's actually, a light under the, light on the dashboard that says, hey, look under the hood, something's needing to be tended to. And we don't have that much of a practice. This generation was not necessarily taught to be with their own discomfort with curiosity. If we look historically at parenting, the good girl was the one who did what she was told and didn't complain. The good boy was the one who bucked up and didn't feel his tender emotions. Children were to be seen and not heard. So I'm seeing that we're asking ourselves as a generation to raise children who are capable of being with their discomfort with some sense of resilience and grace. But we as adults have a real challenge doing that. And so there's I think a lot of shame, and also a tremendous amount of courage and need for camaraderie and empathy for ourselves and each other, that we're asking ourselves to do something really big. We're asking ourselves to develop an immense amount of neural pathways at an older age so that we could raise children who are built with these as their foundation.
Yeah. I just so love how you weave in compassion here, because, we are, the new generation trying to do this work and haven't necessarily had it modeled for us. So I think that takes a lot of courage and compassion. There's such a necessity for this way of parenting, and such a relief flooding through my body as you're speaking. And then I come back to this compassion, like, right, what a tall order, what a lot of work required of us as parents to lead the way in this new, beautiful, necessary movement. And so hard, so challenging.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it keeps coming back to healing. That the challenge is for us to heal our own relationship with just being human, so that we can help raise another little human who's, maybe just 30 years behind us,
right.
Coming into this, kind of complex, beautiful, messy, devastating, joyful experience of finding themselves with this really strange equipment. Our nervous systems, our brains, they work in miraculous ways, but they're also incredibly overwhelmed in this modern age. They weren't really built for this.
Yeah, good point.
So, yeah.
Right. So maybe you can, through example, or we could, look in more detail about the dynamic specifically between mother and child. So you're talking about being with this discomfort, staying with, being curious. There's no right or wrong at this point, right? It's just a contact point in the dynamic where one human's meeting another, right? In your day to day. What are some key practices in building this emotional intelligence in this type of relationship in the moment? Say you're heading out the door and you've got to get to a meeting and the shoes need to be tied. And, when we're maybe not necessarily dropped in and connected to these deeper truths around parenting, and we're just trying to tick the boxes. Can you talk a little bit about that balance, and how does that look? How does that feel? What do we do?
Yeah. I love how you talked about it being a contact point. I think that's a huge piece of it, is honoring that it is a contact point, that there is a place where I as the mother end and you as this other being begins. And how do I practice staying both really respectfully individuated, respectfully for myself and for my child, and connected, especially in these moments where there are things that are overwhelming me, right? So let's just take that piece. The one practice that I work through with clients that seems to be incredibly helpful is actually to create a diary of, moments of overwhelm. I can use the word trigger because that's a popular term to use when you're triggered. And I would say that these are the moments where your whole brain's not fully online. When you start feeling overwhelmed that you're going to be late, and you get a phone call that you didn't expect to get and you shouldn't have answered and you did, and now your mind's on that, and then you stub your toe on a toy on the ground, and all of this is happening, and your brain is flooded with all of these chemicals, adrenaline and cortisol and forms of epinephrine, and you're really the part of your brain that's capable of connecting with your child with empathy, that's capable of really understanding what's happening in the context of time, that everything feels dire right now, but it's not really that dire. In about 5 minutes, you're going to be in the car and it's going to be okay, and you're just going to get through this, right? These parts of your own brain really go offline during these periods of overwhelm. And the more that you can have a practice of experiencing yourself in those moments as individuated. Wow, I am talking really fast. I've got my jaw is clenched. I've got all this buzzy energy happening in my body. The more that you can be aware of that and not project that onto your child's behavior, the easier it is. I mean, in some ways it's hard, right? Because we're taking responsibility for our messiness, and we have this tendency, even I believe in the English language, to blame other people for our emotional state. So this is a practice of being responsible for your own nervous system. So this piece of staying individuated in order to connect in a way that's respectful, in order to connect in a way that doesn't trigger the other person, right? So,
right.
So this practice of knowing I'm going through this, and here's somebody else over here is going through something else. I think it works really well the other way around when our child's having a moment of, incredible frustration or irritation or physical pain or disappointment. If we can actually really stay individuated and realize my child's nervous system is going through something, there's a storm right there. If we as the parent can almost relish in our own freedom in that moment, that's not happening with me. That's happening with my child. There are some tools that are used in trauma healing work where when you feel like you easily become enmeshed with somebody else's nervous system state, you can even just imagine looking at them through binoculars that are backwards.
Yeah.
So, and what's interesting is this individuation might feel like you're not taking deep care, but actually the more we look at this, the only way we can take deep care of somebody is if we really stay in our own seat and hold a space for them to have their experience in our loving company.
Wow. That is so important, that information. I love this term, just taking responsibility of our own nervous system and relishing in that freedom of differentiation. I mean, I get that. I can feel it. And there's just powerful language and powerful reminders. And
it's a hard practice, especially for the majority of us who have been raised with some form of codependent dance in our families or in our other relationships, right? I have a right actually to stay over here and feel okay while somebody I love is experiencing such turmoil. I would say you don't only have a right, you have a duty.
Yeah, that's a nice distinction. Yeah.
Especially when you're the adult, right? It's like we want to hold a place for the child to land in a way that also has empathy and compassion for how hard it is when we're dysregulated to become regulated. And I think in this practice, we earn that empathy. We grow that empathy as the parent who is being dysregulated by the noise or by finances or by being late, right? So this practice that I was kind of pointing to before I didn't follow that line was this practice of identifying our own triggers. And what's beautiful in the work that I've done is that again and again and again, I'll have people who come in and just say, well, that's going to take forever. I'm like a landmine of triggers. I'm triggered all over the place. And then when we look at it, they're really just 3 or 4 things that trigger them. They just show up with different faces all over the place. So it might be that I have a trigger around disorganization, disorder. I have a trigger when things are messy. It's hard for me to concentrate. Or I have a trigger around time. And when I'm feeling like I'm late for something, I get really dysregulated and it ends up, dysregulating my child, and it ends up being a really difficult morning. Or I have a trigger around finances, right? So there's these certain things that are, or this idea of respect. Those are 4 common ones that show up in my work with parents and that I've had to work with myself in various ways of being valued, a trigger around being valued.
Right.
And the more that we look at them and we kind of meet them in our own experience with, flashlights and a soft heart.
Love it.
The more that when our child's experiencing those things, we have an experience of how painful that is. And we have an experience of meeting that pain with compassion and empathy, and our children are able to, I believe, build a relationship with those own internal experiences themselves in ways that are more compassionate if we're modeling that to them externally.
Yeah, so beautifully said. So I'm curious, how do basic needs play into this? So if we're at that contact point with our child, right? And you've so beautifully articulated what potential triggers can come up in those moments. What about needs? Can you share a little bit about how the needs play into this dynamic?
Yeah. Well, part of, I kind of, when I'm even talking to you or I'm working with parents, I have this kind of bookshelf of ideas that I've, collected from various sources that I'll bring in. And so this conversation about needs, the book that I just took off my brain's shelf was the work around nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg's work. And that is, I think, a powerful tool to shift our lens of how we're looking at behavior by really honoring the needs that are underneath behavior. So, this piece of say that I have a need for respect. I have this feeling of this real need for respect, and my child is, I bought them these new shoes yesterday, and they said they really loved them, and I actually went out of my way because it was a really busy day, and they really wanted them for this thing that was happening at school. And now we're, the next morning getting ready, and she says, "I hate these shoes," and throws them across the room. And all of a sudden, this huge kind of monster of pain around not feeling respected arises in me. First, I just want to honor that the more we look at these times that these kind of historical pain kind of clouds come up in us and flood us, the more we realize that what's coming up in us is much bigger than what's happening in the moment right there with this particular child throwing their shoes across the room, right? And often we react in a way that is not necessarily volume-wise or energy-wise appropriate to the moment, which creates a whole other storm, right? So the more we unpack these triggers, the more we can be present with what is, and even just acknowledge, ooh, there's a whole other thing underneath this that's stirring, but that's not really what's happening right now.
Right.
But that's about needs, right? So if I have this need for respect and I'm doing this work, I might in that moment recognize, wow, something's coming up in me around my need for respect, and this is not feeling respectful. And being able to skillfully know where to turn to get my needs met, or to know that I have that need. It's a really important, valuable need in me. This might not be the moment to fight for it.
Right.
It might be that during the day, I really want to reach out to somebody I feel deeply respected by and connect with them. Or it might be that I actually am going to carve out 15 minutes today, and if I journal, or if I play guitar, or if I have something in me that feels valuable that needs to get out, I'm going to respect myself enough to honor that, right? So, one thing is to really honor that the needs are real and they're important. The other piece is that often we're trying to get our need met in kind of unskillful, demanding ways, not necessarily in the direction that's going to serve us the most.
Exactly. Yeah, well said. So for those listeners out there who have toddlers, say, and we're talking about honoring maybe the needs in our younger children, and they perhaps don't have the language or aren't old enough to have a full dialogue around, what their needs are and how they can get them met. Say you have a child and a toddler who's coloring all over the wall or something like that. Can you tell us a little bit to those moms out there who are wanting to be with perhaps a need that this child has, but also want to parent in a way with limits and boundaries?
Yeah, I think this is such an important question, because this is really it. I feel like this is the muscle that this generation is building right here. It's how do I do this work of being with this young human being, respecting their body, mind, and spirit and the needs that come up in them, but not become permissive, which is just as damaging as being authoritarian.
Right.
You know?
Yes.
Because a child needs to have us teach them and scaffold for them what they're not aware of yet around their own safety, around how to be socially appropriate, which is just an unbelievably complex task
that we're all still learning about.
Exactly. And the, the social arenas that we're in keep changing. And about values and morals, right? So, these are things that it is there. These are in the adult's domain of responsibility, and that gets handed to the child slowly and slowly and slowly as the child reaches adolescence and then adulthood. But so let's just take an example. We can take that example of the child drawing on the wall. So, one thing is to recognize that when we are triggered by something, our own creativity really goes offline. It's really hard to be creative. So this is a practice that takes time, because usually when we need our creativity and empathy the most, it's not available to us. My experience is that the more that we have these conversations when we're not triggered, and the more that we practice witnessing what's happening in our body when something's happening, we develop this capacity to become a witness to our overwhelm instead of have it be what's driving the boat,
Right. So practicing it before, not right in the moment. That's not when we take up this practice, when we're triggered.
Yeah. Well, and the more we practice it outside of the moment, the more that our capacity to respond rather than react in the moment increases. Right. Yes. So we'll say a couple of scenarios, and then at the same time, I just want to kind of bow to the fact that we're human, we're messy. If this happened 1 every 5 times where you actually responded instead of reacting, that is movement. We're not also just talking about being compassionate with our children, we're talking about being compassionate with ourselves. And then the other piece is that, when we do react and maybe yell at our child, what are you doing? You can't draw on that wall. We just painted that. I cannot believe you just did that. Go to your room. Right.
Right.
And then our child's crying. I just wanted to draw. There's snot coming out of their mouth. And we feel not only overwhelmed by the fact that we have to repaint this and it's a mess, but we also feel like we're a horrible mother. Right. And so we're like suddenly in this moment of just feels like we're at a loss. So what do I do? So, I would say even in those moments, there's such incredible golden opportunities to repair and connect around our own messiness and humanness and still hold the limit that all's not lost when things get messy. But so in that moment, since we're talking about this and we're not triggered, we could just kind of go down our list of basic human needs and think, and actually this is really accessible online. Anybody who's listening, if you just put in list of basic human needs, there's, Nonviolent Communication has resources that are free online that you can download a list, and it's helpful to look at.
Great. What
would you say those needs are that the child was trying to get met?
I mean, play, creativity, expression, Yeah.
And these are really valuable needs. Our needs for play and creativity and expression are real, and actually for adults, sometimes they've been really stifled. So we could even be triggered around the fact that our child has these needs and they're meeting them in front of us and ours are, not being, and we might be even frustrated about that. So there's another layer of frustration in there. Right.
Yeah.
But, so if we know that, but we also know that, we have a need to, the parents' needs in that moment. So what would the parents' needs in that moment be?
Respect. Some
understanding,
Yeah.
Cooperation. Yeah. So, there's 2 people here and they are trying to get their needs met. And suddenly it seems like the needs are in conflict. I need expression and creativity and play. You need respect and cooperation and understanding. And I need to draw on the wall with a crayon and you need me not to. Right. So it could be that we get confused and we think those are the needs. I need to draw on the wall and you need me not to. And so we're in conflict. But if we do step back and we realize you need creativity and play, you also need scaffolding. You also need understanding. You also need, right? These are needs that I know you need, but in this moment you don't, right?
Can you unpack scaffolding a little bit for our listeners?
So it's like, it really is like looking at a building that's being built, right? So our child, our brains build from the bottom up, really, from the base up, as far as neural pathways are concerned. So there's a whole lot that's not yet developed in our children around understanding the consequences of their actions, really understanding the complexity of time, empathy, impulse control, self-soothing. All of these things are really higher brain functioning. They're more neocortex functioning than they are, toddler functioning for sure. Mm-hmm. And so it's the adult's responsibility to kind of be like a scaffold of a building. While that's while that's developing in you, I'm going to be your exoskeleton of that.
Great visual. I love it. Yeah.
So you can kind of develop in the shape of this. And when it feels like, oh, you got this, I can kind of move the scaffold to another place, right? And be the exoskeleton for that. It might be that, when you're 14, you kind of need me to come back over here a little bit, right?
A lot.
There's some impulse control or, things that are needing more support on a deeper level. So, I'm thinking here, if your whole brain was online, if you had been practicing individuation, if your needs already for understanding and cooperation were met that week in a different scenario, you might have the wherewithal to say, whoa, come here for a second. Wow, you just drew on the wall. That must have been fun, I can imagine. Was that fun? I am thinking you probably want a big surface to draw on, and it feels really fun. And guess what? It's really important that we don't draw on the walls because they're very, very hard to clean and they cost a lot of money to paint. So what do you think we can do about that? Right? Do you have any ideas? Right? So, this is where I'm kind of observing this need. I'm naming it. I'm also dealing with my own dysregulation inside. I might say, that brought up a lot of anxiety in me when you did that because I know it's so hard to clean that wall and you don't know that, do you? Right? So this is an important thing for you to understand. It might be that then we put a whole bunch of pieces of paper that we tape on the wall. We make sure they're not Sharpies. We teach her that if you use this thing, it's going to go through, but the crayons are fine. Right? And we can draw in there, and I can't wait to see what you draw. And we have to paint the wall now. So let's get out a paintbrush and paint. I'm going to teach you how to paint the wall.
There's just so much love and spaciousness and creativity and permission and boundary. I mean, wow. I'm just so moved by that response, and can also deeply appreciate the work and the presence and the self-knowing to be able to show up in that moment that way. And it's so inspiring. It's so inspiring when you model it that way.
Well, what's so interesting to me? It's like when I watch a movie that makes me cry, I usually cry, and I've talked to my daughters about that. We usually cry when we see somebody doing something that feels right.
Yeah.
And we think, oh my gosh, why is it so rare that it moves us so much? Right? And I think it's because it's really hard to be human. I think it's really, it's not always easy to do this thing. The other piece is that, I'm saying to you this scenario and you're saying, it's landing so well in me.
Yeah.
And it's so, moving and beautiful to hear. And part of the reason is because we don't see it very often. It's really hard there's so much that is condoned through media that is not this.
Yeah.
And there's so little help in us building these new dances. We're really kind of all these little islands and these houses doing them by ourselves, often feeling like nobody else's house is nearly as crazy as ours if anybody saw what's going on in here. Right. And I mean, I run groups and everybody that, within the first 2 sessions, it's like, oh my gosh, I am not horrible. My child's not a psychopath. They're just 3. Oh my goodness. Right. All this time I thought there was something wrong with us. It's just that we're showing these photoshopped versions of life on Facebook and all these places that we're not really seeing, that, we're all just messy humans, and we could use some help sharing these stories or making movies or, helping us weave the way to us walking in a way that sits well with our own spirits,
Yeah, absolutely. So could you tell us a little bit, I don't know, maybe about lifestyle choices to support this type of parenting? I mean, you've named already just the inundation with certain messages from media and images from Facebook and how things should be. And there's this tremendous amount of pressure on parents and stress and fast-paced living. Is there anything you can speak to around, setting up our lives in a way to be more successful in these contact points as families?
I mean, I think it does require some aspect of valuing both connection to self and really authentic connection to your child, right? Creating this family time. I think these are the moments of gold, right? And often we're working so hard for these moments we never get. It's like, what are you working for? Well, I'm working for my family. I'm working so that they feel at ease and have what they need. And we know through, so much research in psychology that what we need as a foundation more than anything is secure attachment. Is this, at least there being one adult in our world when we're a child who, Dan Siegel uses this, he's a kind of addict of acronyms. He uses this 4 S's that I find really helpful to just speak about attachment right off the bat. This feeling safe, secure, seen, and soothed by at least one caregiver in our worlds. And we need to make time for that. And I would say that, maybe more than we need to, it's a gift to us to do that. It's a gift not just to the child, but to the adult, that we really connect. We take walks and we talk, or we play games and allow for just kind of free association connection. That I do think that we're living in this era of soundbite information, and we've started doing that with each other. Quickly tell me how your day was. Okay, great. I'll talk to you later.
Right.
Instead of being with. Yeah. And being with ourselves. So, one of the practices that just even speaking, going back to kind of everything that we've spoken about the practice of staying individuated and connected or aware of self and responsible for your own nervous system, the only way we can do that is if we're actually checking in with ourselves from time to time.
Right.
And there are so many different, very simple, really short meditation practices that really just help with the practice of that. In my experience, even if I'm speaking to somebody who doesn't have a practice of checking in those ways, that when we learn to, it feels like a mini vacation. Even if it's just 3 minutes of sitting in your car before you come into the house after you've gone to work or the grocery store, or you're just about to kind of re-enter family, and just taking some breaths and feeling the temperature of the car seat under your body and hearing the sounds of the world around you for a moment, and just visiting the experience that's happening in your body with care. The key is to do that with, we often, as mothers especially, really we understand the value of giving our attention to our children at some point, really attending to them, really hearing them and seeing them and valuing them. And if just for a few minutes a day, it was important to give attention to ourselves in a loving way and say, hey, how you doing? You're doing it. You're doing a lot. You're doing a lot. I'm with you, There's something about that practice that we keep seeing again and again and again in research. How, first of all, that we really do grow new neural pathways around self-awareness when we do that practice. And that those neural pathways are more available to us when we're experiencing discomfort, which gets, allows us to not react so much and maybe see more clearly what's happening.
Right.
And then maybe tend to the pain in us.
It's a beautiful practice. And thank you for modeling it just in this moment here. I'm doing it with you as we speak, right? And, you're just an absolute treasure, Taylor. And I am so grateful to you for coming on our podcast today and offering, all your wisdom. You truly are a tremendous resource in our community. And I hope to talk to you again. I mean, I could speak with you for hours today. I really could. That's
really nice.
Yeah, I do hope you come back and join us again. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be part of the conversation.
Thank you. For us too. Thank you so much for joining us for today's episode. I always feel well-nourished and resourced as a parent after listening to Taylor speak. I appreciate her deep compassion for parents of this generation as we struggle to develop the tools to honor our own humanness while supporting the body, mind, spirit of our children. As we experience discomfort throughout our days on this parenting journey, may we all meet this discomfort with loving curiosity and honor the wisdom being offered in the moment. And of course, let's not forget to do this with plenty of permission to be messy and to forgive ourselves for our mistakes along the way. To get our show notes and more information, go to www.honestmamas.com/episode 28. Also, join our community on Facebook by going to www.facebook.com/honestmamascommunity, where these conversations will continue.